South Korea ended 2024 with a botched martial law order and saw yet another South Korean president impeached just this April. And just 60 days later, the country is now on the hunt for a new leader. We recap the last 6 months and what the past half a year has left us with Professor Mason Richey. Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
And also my colleague, Jung-sil. Welcome, Jung-sil.
Glad to be here.
So, Jung-sil, it's been a hectic year for South Korea. Now, it was the December martial law order to begin with that caught the South Korean people and also the entire world off guard, right?
Absolutely, Tommy. As you said, it did begin on the night of December 3rd around 10:30 p.m. when then President Yoon Suk-yeol stunned the nation by declaring martial law in a televised address. He accused the opposition-led National Assembly of paralyzing the government and invoked sweeping emergency powers, banning all political activity and tightening media control. Moments later, troops surrounded the assembly building. But around 1 a.m. on December 4th, 190 lawmakers, including members of Yoon's own party, some scaling the fences to get in, convened inside and unanimously voted to overturn the decree. Martial law was officially lifted just 6 hours after it was declared. Now, Yoon publicly apologized, but the political backlash was overwhelming. On December 14th, the assembly voted to impeach him. He became the first sitting president detained while in office and was eventually indicted on charges of insurrection. The Constitutional Court upheld the impeachment on April 4th, ruling that Yoon had gravely disrupted the democratic order. Now, under South Korean law, a new election must be held within 60 days when a president is removed from office. So the snap presidential vote was set for June 3rd, bringing us to today.
Right, time did fly, but the past 6 months was definitely a challenging time for South Korea. Now, Professor Richey, this political drama was an experience we certainly didn't need to go through. But do you think South Korea is ready to move forward with this snap presidential election?
I think that your average voter is ready to move on through this election and get past martial law. There are lots of quality of life issues here in South Korea that need to be dealt with. And of course, you know, the world is a fast moving place and Korea can't be in sort of suspended animation without an elected president forever. So I think that's the case. On the other hand, I think the political partisans and the political class are probably not ready to move on from martial law. There are still people among the conservatives who I know who essentially think that Yoon Suk-yeol did the right thing and that they think that the entire impeachment and removal from office was unjust. And the other way around, the Democratic Party obviously believes that this is something that they can use to capitalize on politically. So I think that's sort of my short answer to that. In essence, December 3rd left scars. And how could it not in a country that has had an authoritarian past? And I don't think that those scars are healed yet. And the job of the president, among other things, should be to unite the people so that indeed they can begin to move past this martial law. I'm not certain that that's going to be the case. Korea has a history of what we call a reactive democracy, where the people respond to infringements on their freedom ever since the democratic movement in the 1980s. Right. And really, what needs to move along with that is the political class to move past some of its hang-ups and some of its infighting and polarization, and in essence lead Korea to a place where it can be as institutionally strong in terms of democracy as the people are in terms of reactive democracy when their freedoms are infringed. Right. Takes time to heal. And also, we still have pending homework to resolve within the political circle to begin with. Now, Jung-sil, this is the actual election day, but in-person early and overseas voting had already taken place both at home and abroad with high voter turnouts. Now, let's begin with the 2-day early voting last week.
Yes, Tommy, South Koreans already showed a strong interest and engagement through early and overseas voting. Early voting at home closed with a turnout of 34.74%. 36%, slightly lower than the 36.93 recorded in the last presidential election. Still, considering this year's early voting took place entirely on weekdays, participation remained strong. Turnout was highest in the liberal southwest, including 전라남도 province, while conservative regions such as Daegu and Busan lagged behind in the mid-20s and low 30s. Turnout may have dipped partly because early voting fell on Thursday, Friday this time, unlike the Friday-Saturday schedule in 2022. Now, the National Election Commission introduced hourly updates on voter turnout, as well as 24-hour CCTV recording for early ballot boxes, marking a push toward transparency. As for overseas voting, the numbers hit an all-time high with a 79.5% turnout. Ballots were cast in 223 locations across 118 countries, including first-time participants like Lithuania and Luxembourg. All overseas ballots have now been sealed and transported back to Korea, and they will be counted together with domestic votes today.
Right. The high, both early and overseas voter turnouts are raising hopes for the overall higher voter participation this year. Now, Professor Richey, this is certainly a good sign that more people made sure their votes are being counted. But where do you think these high figures came from?
I think in the first place, this is just a reaction to the martial law. As I said, Korea has a history of a sort of reactive, popular democracy, and clearly people are exercised about the martial law declaration, which has really, I think, motivated people to come out and vote and to reassert popular sovereignty. In the second place, you have two highly polarizing candidates. Especially Lee Jae-myung is highly polarizing. Kim Moon-soo is in his own way polarizing and has become, I would say, increasingly so within the last part of his career, especially as he has been increasingly associated with the hard right here in Korea. So you have two polarizing candidates coming, of course, out of an incredibly polarizing moment, the martial law declaration. And so I think that the high voter turnout, as much as anything else, is a sign that people are both motivated to reassert their popular sovereignty while also voting in many instances, frankly speaking, probably to hope to obviate the election of a candidate that they fear. I mean, I think that there are a lot of people who are going to vote for Lee Jae-myung because they fear the authoritarian or perceived authoritarian tendencies of the right here in Korea. And there are a lot of people who are conservatives who think that Lee Jae-myung is a monstrous dictator and they want to prevent him from becoming president. And so in some sense, both sides are also perhaps motivated by fear as much as anything else.
Definitely. Jong-sil, ahead of the election day today, now the presidential hopefuls had a roughly 3 weeks of campaigning. Now, that wasn't also a smooth ride, was it?
Exactly, Tommy. The campaign period, which started on May 12th, was anything but smooth, especially for the ruling People Power Party. Now, in a dramatic overnight shakeup, the party leadership tried to replace its nominee, Kim Moon-soo, with former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, with just 1 day before registration closed. Kim called it a political coup and filed legal action. Hours later, an internal vote rejected the switch and Kim was reinstated. He also pursued a last-minute unity deal with Lee Jun-seok of the New Reform Party throughout the campaign, but that too failed. He firmly rejected the merger, calling it regressive and a step backward for conservative reform. Lee Jae-myung, meanwhile, stuck to his message, promising to bring an end to the 6 months of political chaos triggered by martial law.
Right, the failure to form a merger within the conservative bloc was another drama within the whole political drama.
Absolutely.
Now, Professor Richey, do you think all that hassle and the failure to form a merger within the conservative bloc had any impact on this snap election or not as much? What do you think?
Yeah, I do. I think that conservatives probably are going to come out and mostly vote conservative. I don't think that they necessarily will be held up from voting for Kim Moon-soo because of the drama that happened. But I do think perhaps moderates who might otherwise have feared Lee Jae-myung might actually choose to vote for Lee Jun-seok, or perhaps will in fact vote for Lee Jae-myung, or perhaps in some cases won't vote. I think that's a relatively small number, but that might be the case. Because the PPP, sort of called into question their competence as a party through the way that they organized their party primary system. The whole thing was kind of a cock-up from the beginning. I remember talking with experts when I was hearing what was beginning to happen with this idea of having a primary and then essentially have that candidate be replaced by Han Duck-soo.
Right.
That was, for many people, considered strange and a little bit incomprehensible. And then, of course, the fact that it didn't go through afterwards and led to this sort of party coup or candidate coup on the night of May 9th into May 10th. Frankly speaking, for some people might have sort of recalled a sort of authoritarian tendencies of the right, which we saw on December 3rd. So it made it harder for the party to move away from this label of somehow being involved in a sort of an authoritarian way of governing, which in turn hurt the party's ability to really make it stick to Lee Jae-myung as being a party authoritarian, which was one of the things that they sort of campaigned on. So I do think that it actually hurt them. I don't think that they handled this very competently. They didn't turn the page very well on December 3rd. And I think all of those things probably hurt them to some extent. That being said, I think ultimately this election has been, from the very beginning, a referendum on December 3rd. And to some degree, a lot of the cake was already baked simply by what happened on that day and in the period that follows. So the actual campaign itself, I think, was going to always be a very difficult and uphill battle for the PPP. We'll see whether or not they manage to get over the hump. But it's been a difficult ride, not only because of December 3rd, but also the way they handled the campaign, frankly.
Indeed, indeed. Now, that's why it'll be interesting to see which candidate the swing voters and the centrists will actually bet on today. And also, Jung-seo, to be exact, the presidential hopefuls had exactly 22 days of campaigning. Now, how did they make the most out of the campaign period?
Well, some of the things that stood out to me was I would like to mention the Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung, who ran a high-security campaign unlike anything we've ever seen in South Korea. He wore a bulletproof vest and stood behind ballistic glass, marking the first time in Korea's electoral history that a major candidate campaigned in such visible protective gear. His team cited credible threats, including reports of smuggled firearms. It also comes just over a year after Lee survived a knife attack while campaigning in Busan, adding to the charged atmosphere around this election. Kim Moon-soo of People Power Party spent the final stretch of his campaign slamming Lee, repeatedly referencing his ongoing legal battles. Lee Jun-seok of Reform Party, meanwhile, hit college campuses using student cafeterias as a backdrop to rally young voters behind his call for generational change.
Jung-seo, campaigning with a bulletproof jacket shows how much South Korea is exposed to deeper polarization. And now, Professor Richey, I have to return to you for the ultimate question. Do you think South Korea is ready to, conquer that political polarization through this presidential election?
That's a very difficult question.
That's why I'm asking you.
To go back to my initial response, I think that your average voter is willing to do that, and in fact, expecting and sees a responsibility for the president to do that. I am not confident that their expectations won't be disappointed, unfortunately. That being said, I think I would say ultimately, the responsibility to overcome polarization lies with the people themselves. In democracies, people get the government they deserve, as the saying goes. And in this regard, I think that it's up to the South Korean voting public to inform themselves better about politics, to be less taken in by both on the left and the right conspiracy theories, fear-mongering, politically polarizing discourse, and to essentially to gather facts in a way that's sound, put them together in a way that's coherent and logical, and come to conclusions based off of policy preferences rather than personalities and conspiracy theories and that sort of thing. That's a high bar, but that's the bar that democracy sets. And so we'll see whether or not the Korean voting public is capable of doing that. the political candidates and the one who becomes president will have a responsibility to try to unite the population. They can certainly make things worse. I doubt that whoever wins will by themselves be able to make things better. And we'll ultimately see again during the next presidential campaign, which hopefully will not be a snap election, but will be held in regular democratic order, whether Korea's democracy can fully recover from the martial law episode and its aftermath.
Whether liberal or conservative, South Korea and the people of South Korea are ready to welcome a new administration. Professor Richey, thank you so much for coming in this morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Chung Seo, thank you for that thorough wrap-up.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.